Medico-legal aspects of death. Death, as defined in RA number 7170, is the irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions, or the irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brain stem. In law, medicine, and statistics, cause of death is an official determination of conditions resulting in a human's death, which may be recorded on a death certificate. A cause of death is determined by a medical examiner. The cause of death is a specific disease or injury, in contrast to the manner of death, which is a small number of categories like natural, accident, suicide, homicide, and undetermined, which have different legal implications. Effects of death to a person. 1. Civil personality is extinguished by death. 2. Property is transmitted to heirs at the time of death. 3. Death causes dissolution or extinction of certain relationships, such as, but not limited to, marriage, partnerships, and agencies. 4. Criminal liability is extinguished by death. Note that only criminal liabilities are removed. Civil liabilities, however, are levied upon the person's estate. A person shall be medically and legally dead if either 1. In the opinion of the attending physician, based on the acceptable standards of medical practice, there is an absence of natural respiratory and cardiac function, and hence resuscitation would not be successful in restoring those functions. In this case, death shall be deemed to have occurred at the time this function ceased. 2. In the opinion of the consulting physician, concurred in by the attending physician, that on the basis of acceptable standards of medical practice, there is an irreversible cessation of all brain functions, and considering the absence of such functions, further attempts at resuscitation or continued supportive maintenance would not be successful in restoring such natural functions. In this case, death shall be deemed to have occurred at the time when these conditions first appeared. The death of a person shall be determined in accordance with the acceptable standards of medical practice and shall be diagnosed separately by the attending physician and another consulting physician, both of whom must be appropriately qualified and suitably experienced in the care of such patients. The death shall be recorded in the patient's medical record. Kinds of death. Brain death. Death by brain criteria is a clinical diagnosis that can be made when there is complete and irreversible cessation of all brain function. Prerequisites. 1. Body temperature must be less than 32.2 degrees Celsius. 2. If barbiturates are present in the blood, serum levels should not be less than 1%. 3. Screen to include other sedative drugs. 4. Absence of severe hypotension or shock. Somatic or clinical death. It is characterized by the discontinuance of cardiac activity and respiration, and eventually leads to the death of all body cells from lack of oxygen. Although for approximately 6 minutes after somatic death, a period referred as to clinical death, a person whose vital organs have not been damaged may be revived. Somatic death is followed by a number of irreversible changes that are of legal importance, especially in the determination of the time of death. Cellular death is the event of a biological cell ceasing to carry out its functions. This may be the result of the natural process of old cells dying and being replaced by new ones, or may result from such factors as disease, localized injury, or the death of the organism of which the cells are parts. Signs of death. Significant signs of death. 1. Cessation of heart action and circulation. 2. Cessation of respiration. 3. Insensibility and loss of power to move. 4. Cooling of the body or algor mortis. 5. Skin changes, pallor or loss of elasticity. And 6. Changes in the eye. Pallor mortis. The first change that occurs in a corpse is the increased paleness in the face and other parts. This is due to the cessation of blood circulation. The capillaries right below our skin provide us with the lively glow of being alive. We don't realize it unless we blush. But when the blood stops circulating to the extremities like the skin looks pale. This is the very first sign and occurs very rapidly, within 15 to 30 minutes of death. Due to this, it is usually insignificant in terms of determining the time of death, unless, of course, death has occurred shortly before the finding of the body. Studies have also proven that the paleness is unaffected by gender differences in bodies. Algor mortis. Humans are warm-blooded organisms, which means that we maintain a constant internal temperature regardless of the outside environment. The brain is our thermostat, and the circulatory system is the main heat dissipator. However, within seconds of death, the brain cells begin to die and the heart stops pumping blood. Without the brain and the blood distributing heat, the corpse eventually starts to match the outside temperature. Our normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. If the ambient temperature around the corpse is less than that, it usually takes between 18 to 20 hours for the corpse temperature to decrease to match the outside temperature. The rate at which the temperature of the body acclimatizes to the outside environment gives some indication of the BMI. However, it can be affected by a number of factors such as fluctuations in outside temperature, the thickness of clothing on the corpse, the place where the corpse has been found, any drugs or other intrinsic factors that could affect his temperature adjustment. There are several equations present to determine BMI, like the Gleiser's equation and the Hensch nomogram technique, which try to account for external factors to make the best possible prediction. Rigor mortis. Immediately after death, a corpse will go flaccid. All the muscles will become relaxed and limp. But after a few hours, the whole body will stiffen. The muscles will now contract and become rigid, a stage called rigor mortis. It is one of the most useful methods of determining time of death, since its progression is mostly predictable. It can also give forensic investigators crucial clues about a crime, based on position of the body in rigor. Certain other deductions can be made, such as whether the site where the body was found is the site of death, if the person died in a particular position, etc. Expressions also freeze on the face of a victim, which helps in giving further insight into the nature of their death. What causes rigor mortis? Muscles need energy to function. This is provided in the form of ATP, or adenosine triphosphate molecules. Our muscles are composed of two bonds called myosin and actin. These two bonds move together towards each other and form bonds. This is how our muscles contract. Energy is then required to break these bonds and let the bonds move away from each other, thereby relaxing the muscle. Immediately after death, the muscles become limp because there is no signal from the brain instructing the muscles to contract. The muscles still have energy reserves that can be used, so the muscles remain relaxed. After a few hours, though, the energy reserves deplete until they are gone. With no more respiration or food intake, no ATP is produced. Therefore, the muscles freeze in the position they are in. Although it starts affecting the whole body at the same time, the smaller muscles like those of the eyelids, face and muscles of the fingers stiffen first due to their small size. How long does rigor mortis last? The process of rigor mortis starts within 2 hours of death and usually peaks at around 12 hours. On average, rigor mortis lasts for 24 to 48 hours. This is affected by factors like ambient temperature. Rigor mortis ends due to the decomposition of the muscles and the body, a process called secondary flaccidity. Livor mortis. This is the final stage of death. When the heart stops beating, the blood is now at the mercy of gravity. It tends to collect at certain parts of the body. Depending on the position of the body, these parts would vary. For instance, if the person was flat on their back when they died, the blood would collect in parts that are touching the ground. If the person was hanging, it would collect in their fingertips, toes, and earlobes. Lividity starts with the skin where the blood has settled, developing a bright red color. After a few hours, the color changes from red to bluish-purple. This can take 6 to 8 hours. Initially, when the skin is pressed, the skin would turn white and return to the bluish color upon the removal of pressure. After approximately 12 hours, however, the blood gets fixed there and the skin does not turn white. The bluish coloring of the skin is called livor mortis or lividity. Lividity can give additional insight into the time of death and help investigators determine if the body has been moved from another place. It can also indicate if someone has died from carbon monoxide poisoning, as carbon monoxide bound to hemoglobin gives a cherry pink color to the skin. Section 85 of PD 856 or Code of Sanitation states that an autopsy shall be performed on a body in the following instances: whenever required by special laws, upon order of competent courts, a mayor, a provincial or city fiscal or prosecutor, upon written request of police authorities, whenever the Solicitor General, provincial or city fiscal prosecutor as authorized by existing laws shall deem it necessary to disinter and take possession of the remains for examination to determine the cause of death, and whenever the nearest of kin shall request in writing the authorities concerned in order to ascertain the cause of death. Types of autopsy: hospital non-official autopsy, usually performed with the consent of the deceased person's relatives. Purpose: determination of cause of death. Provide correlation of clinical diagnosis and clinical symptoms. Determining effectiveness of therapy. Studying the natural course of disease process and educating students and physicians. Medical legal official autopsy, usually performed by forensics. Purpose: to determine the cause, manner, mode, and time of death. To recover, identify, and preserve evidentiary material. Providing interpretation and correction of facts and circumstances related to death. Provide a factual, objective medical report for law enforcement, prosecution, and defense agencies. Separate death due to disease from death to external cause. Thank you. Medical Legal Aspects of Death, produced by Group 4 WIMSU LLB 3B 2020. Sosofronio Eustaquio, Alvin Lepiten, Jonathan Santiago, Siti Aini Mansul, Arnalene Ibrahim, Maricar Canaya, Charlene Sumalpong, and Arif Book.